It began with a whisper, a restless unease spreading across continents. The year was 1939. The world was weary, but not yet broken. And in the heart of Europe, one man's ambition was about to set the planet on fire. This is the story of how the most devastating war in human history began. A war that would claim over 70 million lives, redraw the map of the world, and shape the destiny of nations for generations to come. But before the bombs fell, before America was thrust into the storm, it all began with a single spark, the invasion of Poland. Welcome to episode 1. If you think history is just dates and battles, think again. This is the story of people, leaders blinded by power, nations paralyzed by fear, and ordinary men and women caught in the middle of a nightmare they never saw coming. Europe in crisis. The 1930s were supposed to be a time of recovery. The Great War, what the world called War I, had ended just 2 decades earlier, leaving Europe scarred but hopeful. The victors promised peace through the Treaty of Versailles, believing they had ended all wars. But in their effort to punish Germany, they planted the seeds of the next catastrophe. Humiliation, economic ruin, and a deep thirst for revenge festered in the heart of the defeated nation. In the smoky beer halls of Munich, an Austrian-born veteran named Adolf Hitler was rising. He promised greatness, a rebirth of the German nation. He spoke of unity, destiny, and purity. His words were fire to a people who had known only shame. By 1933, Hitler seized power, transforming Germany into a dictatorship. The world watched, some with alarm, others with indifference. He rearmed his country, defied the treaty that had shackled it, and declared that Germany would stand tall again. But make no mistake, this wasn't just nationalism. It was vengeance wrapped in ideology. He envisioned a 1,000-year Reich, an empire stretching across Europe. And those who didn't fit into his vision, Jews, Roma, political dissidents, would face persecution unlike anything the modern world had seen. While Germany rearmed, the rest of Europe hesitated. Britain and France, still haunted by the horrors of the trenches, wanted to avoid another war at all costs. And across the Atlantic, America turned inward, consumed by the Great Depression, guided by isolationism, determined to stay out of Europe's chaos. But history has a cruel way of punishing inaction. The first moves of defiance. Hitler's ambitions were not hidden. In 1936, he sent troops into the Rhineland, a region that the Treaty of Versailles had declared off-limits to Germany. The world watched nervously and did nothing. Then came Austria. In 1938, German troops marched into Vienna, greeted by cheering crowds. No shots fired, no resistance. The world called it Anschluss, the unification of Austria and Germany. Britain and France protested, but their words were hollow. Encouraged by their silence, Hitler set his sights on Czechoslovakia, a young, democratic nation with strong defenses and proud people. But inside its borders was the set of the land, home to millions of ethnic Germans. Hitler demanded it. And when he did, the world stood on the brink of war. In September 1938, leaders of Europe gathered in Munich. There, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, desperate to maintain peace, signed an agreement handing the Sudetenland to Germany. He returned to London, waving the paper and proclaiming, "Peace for our time." But that peace would last less than a year. The road to invasion. By the spring of 1939, Hitler controlled Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the Rhineland, all without firing a shot. The world had shown him that aggression worked, and he was ready for more. His next target was Poland, a nation reborn after World War I, proud and defiant, standing in the way of his dream of expansion. But this time, he faced a risk. Britain and France had promised to protect Poland. If Germany attacked, they swore they'd go to war. Yet, Hitler believed they were bluffing. They had backed down before. They'd do it again. But to strike Poland, Hitler needed to neutralize a threat in the east, the Soviet Union. So, in a shocking twist of diplomacy, Nazi Germany and Communist Russia signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a secret agreement to divide Eastern Europe between them. The world was stunned. Two sworn enemies, suddenly partners in conquest. Behind the scenes, Hitler prepared his armies. Tanks, artillery, and over 1 million soldiers massed along Poland's border. He told his generals, "Our enemies are worms." I saw them in Munich. The stage was set. The fuse was lit. The world holds its breath. August 31st, 1939. A group of German operatives disguised as Polish soldiers staged a fake attack on a German radio station. It was a lie, a pretext. Hours later, in the early dawn of September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Across Europe, radios crackled with breaking news. Cities awoke to the sound of sirens, the roar of tanks, and the thunder of dive bombers screaming through the sky. This was Blitzkrieg, lightning war, a new kind of warfare that struck with unimaginable speed and ferocity. Poland's defenses crumbled. Civilians fled burning towns. Columns of refugees filled the roads, bombed from above as they ran. Within days, German forces pushed deep into the country, and the world finally realized this was no bluff. On September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The world had changed forever. But as Europe plunged into chaos, America still watched from across the ocean, cautious, uncertain, and divided. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a war in distant lands. Yet he knew that the storm sweeping across Europe could not be contained forever. For now, America would stay neutral. But the tides of history were already turning toward her shores. The fall of Poland and the gathering storm. Poland's resistance was fierce, but the odds were impossible. Within just weeks of the invasion, the country was being torn apart from two directions. Because on September 17, 1939, in a move that shocked the world, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. The secret clause of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was now revealed in blood. German and Soviet troops met in the middle, dividing the nation between them. For Poland, there would be no salvation, only occupation, terror, and silence. For the world, it was a warning. The old order was dead. Britain and France had declared war, yes, but they did little to act. Their armies waited behind the fortified lines in France, as if hoping the storm might simply pass. Historians would later call it the phony war, months of uneasy calm while Poland was erased from the map. Hitler, meanwhile, felt invincible. His gamble had worked once again. He had conquered his first nation in weeks, and the Allies had done nothing to stop him. He turned his eyes west, toward Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and finally France. The machinery of war was roaring to life. The Blitzkrieg unleashed. In the spring of 1940, Europe erupted again. On April 9th, German forces invaded Denmark and Norway, nations that had declared neutrality, hoping to stay clear of the conflict. In less than 2 months, both fell. Then, on May 10th, the real blow came. Hitler's armies swept through Belgium and the Netherlands, bypassing the French defenses known as the Maginot Line. The Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, struck with terrifying speed. Armored divisions sliced through enemy lines, while aircraft obliterated defenses from above. France, one of the great powers of Europe, collapsed in 6 weeks. Paris, the city of light, fell under Nazi control. In June 1940, Hitler stood before the Eiffel Tower, triumphant as German flags waved over the capital. Europe was conquered. Freedom, it seemed, was dying continent by continent. Only one nation still stood defiant: Great Britain. Britain stands alone. In the summer of 1940, Hitler launched his next campaign, the Battle of Britain. For the first time in history, a war would be fought almost entirely in the skies. German bombers darkened the clouds above London, Coventry, and countless cities, unleashing destruction night after night. The British people endured in bomb shelters, their resolve unbroken. And above them, the Royal Air Force fought back with courage that would inspire the world. Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied his nation with immortal words. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." The Battle of Britain became a symbol, proof that tyranny could be resisted. And across the Atlantic, Americans listened. Many still wanted to stay out of Europe's wars, but others began to wonder. If Britain fell, what would stop Hitler next? America watches and worries. President Roosevelt faced a nation divided. The Great Depression still lingered, and most Americans wanted no part in another European bloodbath. The memory of World War I was too raw, the graves too fresh. But Roosevelt saw the danger clearly. In his speeches, he warned that the world was shrinking, that oceans could no longer protect America from the chaos abroad. Quietly, he began to prepare. In 1940, Roosevelt pushed for a massive military buildup. He ran for an unprecedented third term, arguing that the world was too unstable to change leadership. And when Britain seemed on the verge of collapse, he found a way to help without declaring war. The Lend-Lease Act allowed the United States to supply Britain with weapons, food, and ships, calling it a loan, but knowing it was a lifeline. Roosevelt put it simply, "We must be the arsenal of democracy." The American people were watching Europe burn. And though they didn't yet know it, the fire was slowly spreading toward them. The Axis expands. While Britain fought for survival, Hitler forged new alliances. In 1940, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, forming the Axis powers. 3 nations, 3 ambitions, 1 goal: domination. Italy, under Benito Mussolini, dreamed of reviving the Roman Empire, waging brutal campaigns in Africa and the Balkans. Japan sought control over Asia and the Pacific, already at war in China and hungry for resources. Together, they imagined a world ruled by their might, a world where democracy would be extinguished. And in America, newspapers carried headlines that chilled the nation. Europe falls, Asia burns, America next? The question hung in the air, unanswered, for now. The turning of the tide. By 1941, Hitler had conquered most of Europe, but his ambition had no limits. Against the advice of his generals, he turned east, toward the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers crossed the border, shattering the fragile pact with Stalin. At first, victory seemed certain. The Red Army was caught off guard. Prisoners were taken by the millions. But Hitler had underestimated both the land and its people. As winter set in, the temperature plunged, and the German advance stalled in the snow. The Eastern Front would become a nightmare, a brutal struggle that devoured entire armies. Still, America watched from the sidelines. Until one morning, everything changed. December 7th, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii. The sky was blue. The sea was calm. And then, out of the clouds, came the roar of engines. Japanese aircraft descended on Pearl Harbor, unleashing devastation on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. In less than 2 hours, battleships burned, planes exploded, and over 2,000 Americans were dead. The nation was stunned, then united. President Roosevelt addressed Congress the next day. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on America. The isolation was over. The war that began in Europe had now become a global conflict. And for the first time, the full power of the United States would enter the stage. The world engulfed. In just over 2 years, the world had changed beyond recognition. The spark that ignited in Poland had become a firestorm consuming every continent. From the beaches of France to the deserts of North Africa, from the icy plains of Russia to the jungles of the Pacific, humanity was at war. And for America, what began as a distant struggle would become a fight for freedom itself. Factories roared to life. Soldiers enlisted by the millions. The sleeping giant had awakened. The road ahead would be long, bloody, and uncertain. But in the face of tyranny, a generation of Americans would rise and change the course of history forever. The world had watched as one invasion in 1939 set humanity on a path to destruction. But from that darkness would emerge heroes, sacrifices, and stories that still define us today. This was only the beginning, the spark that ignited World War II. In the next episode, we'll journey deeper into the conflict, from Pearl Harbor to D-Day, from the fall of Europe to the rise of the Allies. If this story moved you, honor the history, like, comment, and subscribe to join us as we continue this cinematic journey through the greatest struggle the world has ever known. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding how we got here and what we choose to remember.